Hi guys, so let's talk about the waiting season and how completely different it is for all of us. And I've realized that you might find someone or something that speaks hope to you, encouragement, but then you'll go back, or you might find yourself in a space where you're questioning, is it really a waiting season? Is it by God's hand or is it by my hand? For me personally, I found myself in that place where I've questioned myself until, I suppose, asking God for a lot of affirmations, a lot of confirmations if this season is really Him or about me, has assured me that this is about God and it has nothing to do with me, like quite literally. And I'm glad about that, because I guess when you know God is in something, that it's truly Him and it's not about you, it lifts a weight off of your back. Like it takes off this burden from you about that maybe I'm the one who's not, that burden of questioning and wondering if am I doing enough? Am I doing maybe things the right way? It takes that burden off your back. And this is not to mean that you will not face situations where you're doubting. Obviously, we're all human beings, and you might find yourself in a situation where you're doubting if it has anything to do with you, or if God called you, maybe you did not hear when He was calling you out of the waiting season. And for me, it has looked like a lot of things. It's been a lot of, I'd say quite literally, it feels like the long suffering. You know how the scriptures talk about long suffering? That's how quite literally it's felt like. And I think just by the fact that God highlighted that word for me quite recently, it's funny, but I feel like, yeah, He sees me. He understands that this hasn't been easy for me, and it hasn't been easy even for the people He's called out for me during this waiting season. And I'm just glad that it's about God. So some of the things I want to highlight is, for example, how long does the waiting season take? I've seen people who have had it so hard in 2 months, and I don't mean by what's going on, but by how they feel about it and what goes on. Like the process of those 2 months has been more for them than it would be for someone else who has gone for a longer time period, because there are people who have gone for years. Just quite recently, I was listening to this woman and this man who have gone for over 20-something years. I don't know if it was 23 years or over that. And the man was 59 when God fulfilled His promise. And the woman was 43 years, something like that. The man was 59, the woman was 43, quite from completely different continents. And I've seen people who have gone 2 months. I've heard of people who have gone 6 months, and it's like heavy on them. So if you're out there and you've gone through years, please don't think that you're in this alone. Like, God can take you through a waiting season that is longer than what you expect. Look at, for example, Abraham and Sarah. They were past the time where you could even have had hope for, like, they're going to get what they've been promised by God. And they even slipped up and tried something else to try and find a way to accomplish the promise, because it was like, maybe God meant this. And those are the places where you find yourself, where you're asking yourself, maybe God meant this and not this. But God does not, He's not like a man. He does not change His mind. When He says a promise will come to you a certain way, it's going to come to you that certain way. It's not going to change, He's not the type of, He's not what we are used to, He's not, He will surprise you, but you will see that exactly what He said He will do, that is exactly how He will do it. And yeah, so another thing is that the waiting season is not easy. You will have tears, because it's a breaking down. God loves a broken spirit, because a broken spirit is more willing, more open to hear Him, to receive Him. So you will go through a broken a brokenness that, yeah, that will force you to get under God's wings, that will force you to be quiet, be still and hear God. And I was looking at reading Job's story because it resonated with me a lot. The man went from high up, he was up top, and he went to this isolation place to the extent where his friends, when they heard about the calamity that had befallen him, they came to see him, and for 7 days they never spoke because of the shock of what was going on, and they assumed that maybe he'd done something wrong to God. Basically that whole drift, and it saddened Job. But while I was reading this story, something caught my eye. There is, I don't know if it is 2 or 3 chapters after all this back and forth of his friends and him questioning, and him being confronted that God does not get it wrong, he goes quiet. When he goes quiet, that is the exact time God speaks to him. That is the time God responds. And quickly after that, you realize that Job actually is restored back to actually better than where he was, even though he had experienced loss. And also a thing that needs to be highlighted, even though God restored everything better than where he was, you have to keep in mind that he lost his children. And even though God gave him other children, there was still that probably wound or maybe a healing that he had to go through of his previous children, because they were still his children even when God was giving him more beautiful children. Yeah, so I suppose during this waiting season, you have to remember that when you keep your focus on God, you will stop listening to the things that are wrong, listening to all the wrong information that's around you, because a lot of wrong information will come around you. And that is why you will also, even you yourself, you will find yourself questioning a lot of things about yourself, questioning a lot of things about God. Did you hear God? Is the waiting season still God's waiting season for you, or is it your waiting season for you? Is it that you're unable? Is it like a generational curse that's following you? But remember, always remember that when you're of God, God covers you, God forgives, God breaks generational curses just by you following God. Like, there is power. When you're in the presence of God, everything that is ungodly is cut off. So when you're in the presence of God, how can this darkness hover around you if it is not something that has been allowed by God to test you? And the testing is to structure your character for where you're going. There is this elderly woman who told me, I remember when I was going through something, because I was so discouraged. I was wondering, like, why is it taking so long for me to get out of this? And she told me, look at it this way. The deeper your roots have to be, that your depth is deeper because you're going higher. And that is so heavy. And it made me check a lot of people who went through stuff even in the Bible, like David. I remember there's a situation where David was even accused by one of the relatives to Saul about how he's a criminal, how he's, all these bad, evil things, and that the reason why his own son was turning against him is because he was evil, and he was getting justice, punishment for all his sins. And this same man, after David was blessed, was one of the people who came back to save him. But when he was accusing David, David said, leave him. When they were suggesting if they end him because of that, David's people are suggesting that he be ended for speaking like that. David said, leave it. It's none of your business. What is it if God has allowed him to say that to him, then let it be. And it can tell you that where David was at that time, he'd gone through so much to the point where he looked at everything as a making of God. And I know it can seem like a negative thing, but I think looking at it like that everything that is happening to you during this season is a making of God. It makes it easy for you, because you might not understand it. I might not understand it. No one might be able to understand it ever. but God will make sense of it. God will justify you in some sort of way when that season is over. And also another thing to remember is that God, anytime you ask God for anything, or anytime you submit to God's rulership and sovereignty, it's not according to your will, it's according to His will. And whenever God is about to give you something, He does not just throw you into a situation. He has to train you, and His way of training involves your spirit, it involves your heart posture, it involves your faith, it involves your character. So you will find yourself in the waiting season going through this dark space, finding yourself in this dark space where you have to, it's a testing of everything that you are, it's a testing of everything you believe, it's a testing of where you run to when you're in pain, where you run to when there's an injustice, where you run to when you're falsely accused, where you run to when you're in lack, where you run to when you feel like you're drowning. Yeah, so the waiting season is not easy, but it makes sense, and it's also not completely dark, because you see the supernatural hand of God. Like, I have experiences with God, and I don't mean just spiritual things, I mean even quite physical things where